Hello, hello, hello. Hello. Okay. I have been recently trying to read the Iliad for the first time, and it is proving a little challenging and a little difficult. And over the past month or so, I have been discovering various techniques, Googling resources, talking to people about this and how to read this book that is hard and unfamiliar and full of things that I don't know about. And slowly, I feel like I'm starting to make some progress. I'm starting to figure out what's going on. I feel hopeful that I will read it and I'll come to the end and I will know what will have happened. And that maybe one day I could also read the Odyssey. But we're not there yet. That's going to be in the future. The future, okay? Right now, we're just trying to get through Monsieur l'Iliade. I think that this text is very much worth reading. And so I think that it is worth all of this hard work and this hababaloo, this fanfare, to try and read it. It's not just like a fun little story that I can pick off my shelf, open, and dive right into and read. But it is something that I think is going to inform every book I read after this. So I am putting in the work and I'm reading it. Okay, so I wanted to make this video so that I can give you the tips, the advice, the little gold nuggets that I have figured out over the past month without you having to do all the work yourself, okay? I want you to also read the Iliad. You can read it with me if you want, but read it when you're ready. Read it when you're ready. But when you are ready, this video is here for you with some tips, some things that I am finding helpful and that things that I have really noticed have improved my understanding of the story compared to the first moment I cracked her open and tried to just dive right in. Okay, so the first thing I think that is important is to get a good translation. Now, I've only read the one translation, so this isn't so much something I had to figure out, but it was something I was aware of because I was buying a new book and I wanted to get one that was good, true to the text, but not unnecessarily convoluted or poetic, I guess. I think some of the translations, like Alexander Pope's, are much more difficult to understand, especially as a contemporary reader. But I ended up going with Richmond Lattimore's translation because it was the one recommended by our delightful Angelina Stanford from the Literary Life podcast, and I trust her implicitly with anything related to a book. And she said this one, I said I will look no further. Okay, but I know that the Fagles translation is also a very popular and I think probably good. And if you have that one, just read that one. Honestly, read the one you have, unless maybe it's like Alexander Pope's, then maybe get a different one. But first look what translation you're reading, because you could be doing yourself dirty. So I made sure I had a good translation. Now, even after I knew I had this good translation, I started reading the introduction, and then I said, not now. I just wanted to get to the poem. So I skipped past the introduction. I might go back later. And I read the first couple dozen lines, and I was like, oh boy, this is gonna be a hard one. And immediately I put it down. I said, I need more context. I am already lost. And it wasn't like you just have to get into the story and give yourself a minute. I was so confused. And I think one of the reasons is that this book starts in the middle of the action, right? There's no introduction, no context, no background. It's just like, here we are, okay? And I think that the original audience would have known a lot more of the lore, if you will, around this story. Who the characters were, who the gods are, why, like, people's motivations, why certain people are angry, why they're doing certain things. I think there would have been a lot more general knowledge around this. But as a contemporary reader, and someone who has not read much Greek mythology or Greek history, I have no idea what's going on. And so it starts, and I don't know why anyone is doing anything. I don't know who these people are, and they're expecting me to know. Okay, so I put it down, and I said, I need to figure out what's happening. So then I read a summary, and I have now been doing this with every book since I first opened. The Iliad is divided into 24 books. That's what they're called. So before I start a book, I will read the summary, and then I read the book, and then I usually read the summary again. Because that's like, there's just so many people and motivations and little side jingles that I find I need to go over it at least 3 times. So I guess that is my first tip, that things that you can do while you're reading. That can be the name of this category. Read a summary. You can either before or after, or both, whichever you find helpful. Also, one thing that I'm finding very helpful, especially if I'm finding myself getting lost and not able to follow the narrative, is to start reading out loud. So I'll read out loud, or if I'm in a public space, I will read out loud in my head, if you know what I mean. Like, I'll read the pace. I'll kind of pretend I'm speaking it, so I'm doing it slowly, but it's still in my head, so I'm not bothering other people around me. So I will do that. Or I haven't tried this, but I have some friends who are saying it's very helpful to listen to the audiobook while you're looking at the text and reading. This story would have been spoken and told orally, so it really lends itself to being read that way. Another thing that I'm finding I'm having to do quite a bit is to stop and go back and reread sections really regularly. This used to hurt my soul to do this. I was like, I just made all this progress. I've read so many pages. And then I'd realize I don't know what's happening. And I used to hate going back, or I wouldn't even go back. I would just go forward, and I'm like, you'll figure it out later. And maybe sometimes that's what you should do, or that's what you can do. But recently I've been telling myself that, no, Renee, it's worth it to go back and reread. If you don't know what you just read, like, you can't say you read it. You didn't read it. You looked at the paper, but you didn't read it. So I'm finding I have to do that regularly because there's so much going on, and it's in verse, and it's a lot of things that like I said, don't know about. A lot of people I'm not familiar with. So I regularly am going back and be like, wait, what just happened? What just happened? Who fought who? Is someone dead? You might miss like one line, could be the transition to a new location. And sometimes I miss it. So then I go back and find it when I get lost. So I'm finding that very helpful. I'm also finding that it is a book I need to read slowly, which I kind of knew this, but I'm finding that I just need to read extra slowly. So I kind of like reading it in big chunks. So I like to read either half a book or a full book in one sitting-ish. But then I will space those out a lot because I feel like I need a break. I want to enjoy this book, so I sort of wait till I'm in the mood, and then I give it another go. Yeah, I think I'm reading this, which this is going into my third category, which is exterior resources. But to transition into that category of help is I think everyone in my book club, I'm reading this with a book club, they were also finding that it just takes a long time to read a little bit. So we're going to read 12 books this month and 12 books next, but we're going to do it 3 months. So we're going to do 8, 8, 8 instead, because we're all finding that we need to go slow. But yes, so third section, other resources outside of yourself. Very important. Like I said, book club. I am reading this with other people. And we haven't met for this book yet, but in my past experience, whenever we meet with a book that's difficult, I feel so encouraged after, because all these people have such good insights and really make the text come alive when we talk about it. It also helps me to remember it better once we talk about it. And I also feel like I need to show up prepared to talk about it. So then I have to have a certain familiarity with the text already. And it encourages me to be more intentional with my reading. So I'm really excited to meet and talk about this book over the next 3 months. It's also giving me deadlines, which are helpful, because you could easily let this book slip by the wayside when you're getting a little overwhelmed or you're deep in the trenches. But having that deadline and with other people, and these are people that I also see at other points in my life, and so we'll bring it up, we'll talk about it, and it just encourages me to keep reading. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, I do not understand what happened here, what was going on here, and we'll talk it out. And it's just so helpful to have other people reading the text, because sometimes read something like this when no one else around you gets it or is reading it at all, it kind of feels not lonely, but it's like, why am I doing all this hard work just for myself, or like but this really brings it into community, and you can get excited together, and you learn way more when other people are learning alongside you. So I'd recommend reading with other people if you are so blessed to be able to find people who want to read the Iliad around you. Ask around, someone might be into it. The last thing I want to talk about is this podcast. And you're going to say podcast, Renee, you're going to say literary life. And I'm going to say, surprise, not this time. The literary life has not done Homer yet. Maybe one day. But I found this other podcast. Well, actually, someone else who's reading it with me found the podcast. See what's happened? And it is so helpful. I've only listened to a couple episodes, so that's all I can vouch for. And they are long. I just forget what it's called, so I'm pulling it up. But this podcast called Ascend, the Great Books Podcast. And I think their thing is that they're going to go through a bunch of great books, but they are starting with the Iliad. And they are doing it very slow. They are doing 1 book a week. So they have a full episode on every book. So this is going to have 24 episodes. It's a lot of listening time, but it is very helpful to hear someone discuss what happened afterwards. And you don't have to listen to the whole thing. You listen to part. You could listen to every other book. But just getting that reinforcement. They also offer a lot of context. They'll tell you a lot of the stories. Like I said, there's a lot of lore, mythology, stories around that people at the time would have already been familiar with that I am not. And so sometimes when we need to be filled in, they'll fill you in, and they'll help sort out all of the relationships between the characters. So far, finding it extremely helpful. I will link it in the description if you want to check it out. But they seem... So far, it seems very, very helpful. All right. But like I said, I am just at the beginning of my Iliad journey, literally only on book 5, halfway through book 5. So these tips are still coming from a novice. Maybe at the end, I will have many more things to share. Or maybe I'll say everything I said on that video was foolish and don't listen to me. I don't know. But right now, it's where I'm at. If you have any experience with the Iliad, I'd love to know. Did you read it? Did you enjoy it? Have you read it multiple times? It seems a book that I need to read a lot. this podcast that I think it was in that podcast I just talked about, the Ascend. Honk-a-donk. The Ascend podcast, that you read these great books to reread them. So I am hoping that this won't be my only walk around the park. And the next time will be much easier and much more enjoyable because I will have already done so much work. And then there's the Odyssey. Then I gotta do the Odyssey. Great. Okay. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I hope these tips are helpful. And I hope that you find yourself reading the Iliad. It got very dark during this video. It is the middle of the day, but it is stormy. So I'm going to go snuggle up and maybe read a book. Honestly, not the Iliad right now because I'm too tired, but another thing. Bye.